Welcome back, Button Club members. I am your host, ShadowFury, and in today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the V1 buttons from Punk Workshop. Before we get started, I should mention that this video is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form by Punk Workshop. We tested these buttons briefly at a Button Club weekly thanks to Tomato of Tomato's Retro Garden. He brought in an arcade 1-up cabinet so we could play some Vampire Savior for the evening, and he had these buttons installed in it. And after playing on them for the night, I just knew that I had to try out these buttons. So big shout outs to Tomato of Tomato's Retro Garden. We ended up getting these on a trade with him, and that's how we were able to try them. I was already pretty intrigued by the Punk Workshop products as I was already aware of their buttons and their leverless cases that they make currently. Now there are two versions of the Punk Workshop button. These are the V1s, but they also make the V2s. The only real difference between each button is the switch that comes inside of the housing. Both switches have the same force rating of 40 centinewtons. Centinewton is the amount of force required to actuate these buttons. So what does that mean? That means it takes less pressure to actuate this button than it does for the Quamba gravity buttons that we have reviewed here on the channel. If you haven't seen that video yet, I do encourage you to check it out because more knowledge is more power. With a featherlight touch, the V1s sport a 0.5mm pre-travel and a 1.2mm total travel. So what does all that really mean? That just means that these buttons are super sensitive and it doesn't take a lot of time or travel to get your button press. These buttons kind of remind me of the Hori Hayabusa buttons, but don't let that statement deter you from trying them out because I do find the switches are a much higher quality than what comes standard with the Hori Hayabusa. While I haven't tried the V2s yet, I am really interested in giving them a shot. I do feel like the V2s might be more in line or feel familiar to other buttons that I have tried in the past. I found this low profile button quick to respond, but the overall feeling while playing on these buttons felt like a dead button. There is no tactile feel when you're playing on the Punk Workshop buttons, and the only time that you realize you've registered a button press is when you've bottomed out the cap inside the button housing. I know there's not much feel in a Sanwa button, which is the industry standard, but you can at least feel a little bit of the resistance from the switch when you're playing on it. This has absolutely no feeling to it whatsoever. My initial impressions of the button, I was very excited to play on it. I really liked the short throw travel time, but after playing on it for a little while, I kind of felt like it just didn't really hit the mark. The switch is what really kind of ruined this button for me. If you thought the Sanwa buttons were sensitive, then these definitely top that out. The average amount of force for a Sanwa button is 50 to 55 centinewtons, and since this comes in at 10 to 15 points lower, these buttons just actuate super quickly and have no travel time whatsoever for you to get your button press. Now that could be a mixed bag, right? If you are looking for a very responsive button because you play very lightly, then these might be for you. But if you find Sanwa buttons to be overall too sensitive, I would not recommend these for you at all. Now a really cool feature about these buttons is that you can remove the plunger and the switch inside of it, so I had to try that. I ended up having a set of Cherry MX Speed Silver switches, so I decided to remove the stock switch that came with the Punk Workshops and put those in there since they are hot swappable. Now while I did like the overall feel of the Speed Silver switch, it completely changed the travel time of the button plunger. If you take a quick look here, you can already see the overall major height difference and travel time between the Cherry MX Speed Silver and the stock Punk Workshop V1 switches. These short stem switches are definitely more compatible with the Punk Workshop buttons, but I kind of wish there was a happy medium between the Speed Silver switch and the V1 switch. I imagine that happy medium is probably within the V2 switch. If you guys are interested in me trying out the V2 buttons, leave a comment down below. Alright, enough about the switches. Let's move on to the body and overall build of the Punk Workshop V1s. When taking apart these buttons, they came apart in a very unconventional way compared to other arcade companies. The button plunger is molded to fit into the switch, and that's it. It's more like a keyboard assembly than it is an arcade button, while still maintaining the familiar installation of your standard arcade buttons. Simply pull the button off of the switch, and you're in business. The Punk Workshop buttons also come with some small rubber O-rings. Now this is used to help dampen the sound when using these buttons. Like most silent buttons, it reduces the overall noise, but you can still definitely hear them when you're playing on them. Now here's a sound test of the Speed Silver switch inside of the Punk Workshop button. And now here's a sound comparison with both Punk Workshop switches with and without the O-ring. So while it does dampen the noise, it doesn't completely eliminate the sound of the button plunger bottoming out on the button housing, but it is a really, really big help, and it's all done so simply by this tiny little rubber gasket O-ring. My favorite feature by far of the Punk Workshop buttons is the molded plastic body. Far gone are the days of breaking tabs on your Sanwa button when trying to install or remove from your current arcade stick. The design of these are just so much more brilliant. If you take a close look at the tabs, you see that they are in the reverse order compared to other buttons. So what does that do? When it comes to installing these, they go in so much easier because the tabs are reversed and now really give you something to hold on to when you're putting it into the case. We all hate breaking tabs. These buttons are not cheap, so when it comes to replacing them, it is a huge, huge frustration. I'm looking at all of you with your snap-in buttons. Sanwa, Kwamba, the whole lot of you. I think this is a great step for ease of modability when it comes to customizing your arcade stick. The plastic material that these are made out of are not rigid at all. They completely contrast other button companies. The whole body and tabs are super flexible, making it easy to remove and install in any enclosure. Just take a look at all that flex. This is a huge blessing because we all know that not all arcade stick enclosures are made equally. Some of the tolerances on the button holes are greater or lesser than others. So when it comes to putting these in those, I just found it super easy. I didn't even need to use the Butter Arcade button remover tool in order to get these out. It was just really easy to not only pinch the tabs, but pinch the whole body and have it just removed so easily. So for instance, the Victrix leverless that we have here on the channel does not accommodate screw back buttons on the directional side. And Lord knows, you can ask my brother, we've broken plenty of Sanwa button tabs trying to get buttons in and out of his Victrix leverless. Now these buttons fit perfectly in every case that I have except for the Victrix. They were able to spin within the case and not get completely stuck on the notches that are machined in the back of the body. I was able to solve that problem by taking these plastic O-rings that came with the Mad Catz TE2 sticks and use that to fill the space between the body of the button and the arcade stick enclosure. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, what about buttons that have the screw back on it? Not all enclosures will allow for that. If you take a look at the Mad Catz TE2 or the Kwamba Pearl, some of those button holes are really close to either a PCB or a mounting plate for the JLF joystick, making these a huge deal to put into any arcade enclosure like we mentioned. These buttons also come in two different colors for the body, smoke and clear, and the plungers come in a variety of colors to fit the aesthetic of any fight stick or leverless controller. Now let's talk about the price. All these features, I would imagine the price to reflect that type of quality. But these buttons are extremely reasonable when it comes to the cost. Regardless of the size of the button, whether it's for your leverless or your arcade stick, these buttons come in at $2.50 from the Punk Workshop website. Now these buttons are available on Amazon in special kits, but if you're looking for a variety of colors to customize your experience with your arcade enclosure, I would recommend going straight to the source and buying from Punk Workshop themselves. Now, when you buy directly from Punk Workshop, they are going to take a little bit longer to get sent to your house because they are overseas. But you are able to customize and mix and match your button order as you please. Now you might be asking yourself, who are these buttons for exactly? If you're someone who plays lightly, these buttons might be for you. If you're someone that really likes to smack those buttons, I don't think you'll really enjoy this because you get absolutely no feel from the switch. Because these buttons are so low profile, they are susceptible to accidental presses, I would imagine. While I'm not a huge fan of these switches, I do think there's plenty to like about these buttons, and I do recommend giving them a try. Since the switch is everything to the overall feel of the button, it's my only small gripe when it comes to the Punk Workshop V1s. Maybe in the future we can get our hands on a set of V2s and cover them here for you on the channel. Now, after about 2 weeks of using these, I ended up switching back to the Kwamba Gravity buttons. They are just my favorite and far more preferred. They're a higher quality button with a higher price point, but I just ended up enjoying them more than the Punk Workshop buttons. But that doesn't mean that you won't enjoy these buttons. Now, to give these Punk Workshop V1s a grade, I would have to probably say in the 3.5 range. They're not amazing, they're not bad, they're innovative in so many ways, but my biggest complaint being the switches. There are far more pluses to these buttons than there are negatives, but the feel of the switches was the biggest turnoff for me. But just because they weren't for me, that doesn't mean that they can't be for you. And at this price point, why wouldn't you try these? If everything I've mentioned sounds like it's for you, then I definitely recommend giving these a try. And if the switches don't hit home with you, pick up the V2s. And let me know what you think of them in the comment section below. Maybe you can entice me to pick up a set and I can try them here on the channel. That's going to do it for this review video. I hope you've enjoyed yourself and have found this video to be as informative as possible. If you've enjoyed yourself, punish counter that like button. If you like the content and want more, please drive impact that subscribe button. And if you're in the giving mood, share this video with someone that you think might like this content. If you're new here, check out some of our other videos. We have a wide variety from unboxings to streams, plus our weekly tournaments and our Safe Sets podcast with Ricky Icebeam. Comment down below what you thought of this video, and if you have these buttons at home, let me know what you think of them. I'm ShadowFury. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and all the love that you have shown the channel. I'll catch you guys on the next video, and for me and everyone at home, keep pressing them buttons.